Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. And today, so we're actually going to be watching this video again. So, if you don't know what happened, I already recorded this video, and it was actually scheduled to come out today. In fact, it did. But one person in the comment did point out that it seems like the OBS. I don't know what happened. I don't know what the hell's going on with OBS. Sometimes it doesn't pick up the mic, or sometimes it doesn't pick up the audio from the video. I don't know what the hell's going on with it. It's so goddamn annoying. But it seems like the OBS didn't pick up the audio for the actual video. So we're going to be watching this again. So just to let you know, we already watched this once, and we're going to be watching it again. So let's just go ahead and check the audio. Again, if you're wondering why I lower the volume, it's because you know how YouTube is with copyright, especially when it comes to anime. Again, I don't mind if they claim the video, but the problem is they don't just claim it, they completely block the video from ever being seen, and that's what I have a problem with, so I have to be careful with the audio. So let's just go ahead and watch the video. Oh yeah, as always, spoilers for the anime or the manga.
人、夫婦、ユーピー、
いかがなされましたか。
夫婦。
は、
そう、お前は夫婦だ。世の名前は何という。
恐れながら申し上げます。王は王です。それ以外の何者でもなく、唯一無二の存在。今は様々なまがい者がその名を無断で使っていますが、すべて排除、抹殺いたします。王といえば、世界中の誰もがたった一人の存在を思い浮かべるよう。
それはただの前提であろうが、王は称号、称号は所詮冠で名前ではない。ユーピーはどうだ。
私には2が勝ちすぎる問題。到底答えを用いること叶いませぬ。
人。
やはり王ご自身のお気持ちが一番大事でございます。王ご自身が最もふさわしいと思われる名を付けられるのがよろしいかと。
まあよいわ。
It's summed up with this one moment. Meruem, upon learning the concept and importance of names, asks his closest confidants, his royal guard, to tell him what his is. The respective answers are a microcosm of each character's objective flaw as a royal guard. Pito's insistence on the king's feelings show an adherence to empathy, which...
Let's read that for a second. Okay, here we go. My favorite moment of the Royal Guards is when Meruem asks them what his name is. In only a few minutes, their responses perfectly encapsulate their characters and subtly foreshadow their development. Pito says she thinks how the king feels is what's important and should choose his own name, showing that she prioritizes emotion and revealing the empathy within her loyalty. That's true. Yuppie responds that he believes he doesn't have the capacity to answer the question, showing that he only does what he feels he should, and thus revealing his hidden dedication to duty. And finally, Poof responds that Meruem's name is king and that the name is who he is and what his destiny is, betraying the truth that his loyalty is not to Meruem but to his idea of who Meruem should be. And that's going to be really important in the video moving forward, especially a moment that I know is coming up that I already mentioned in the video that I already recorded, but I'll bring it back up again in case you want to know what it is.
...the flaw as a royal guard. Pito's insistence on the king's feelings show an adherence to empathy, which ends up profoundly characterizing her arc. Yuppie avoids answering, saying it is not in his place to ponder such lofty ideals. This gives a little inclination to his predilection for duty, which extrapolates to his wholehearted display of honor during the palace invasion. But the third guard's answer is slightly more impactful. Shaipouf, unaware of Meruem's growing humanity and yearning for identity, says something very indicative, that his name is King, a name synonymous with his fate and who he was born to become. With no thoughts spared and no understanding of Meruem's reasons behind the question, Poof shows a lack of awareness of the king's feelings and is very clearly fixated on and loyal to his idea of Meruem, but not Meruem himself. It is an exaggerated dedication to an idealized concept, not a person. And before things spiral out of control, and the story's events demonstrate this as forcefully as ever, it is clearly hinted at in one of the quietest moments. this little seed of madness that was destined to lead to catastrophe. Shaipouf is a brilliant, one-of-a-kind character. He is as true of a villain as the Chimera Ant arc had, a royal guard whose unwinding, poetic downfall allowed the other narrative elements to flourish as beautifully as they did. While he may not be as well regarded as the series' most loved villains, partly due to the frankly stupid notion that well-written characters cannot be extremely unlikable ones,
No,
he sure
that's-
as hell should
that's
be,
completely
because
untrue.
he is comfortably written with a similar
Do people actually have the notion that a well-written character can't be unlikable? I mean, again, they probably think that, oh, well, because I don't like the character, that means the character's not well-written. I don't think that's the case. I think that there are plenty of characters that are probably really unlikable that are very, very well-written. And let's see, who can I think of now? I mean, just think of villains, just any villain. Oh, I can think of one. Here's one. Johan from Monster. I mean, I do not like that guy, but I will always say no. He is very well written. I don't like the character because I don't like what he does. I don't like what he stands for. Oh, here's another character, Arthur Fleck from Joker. You know, I don't like the character because of what he does, but do I think that the character isn't well written? No, I think he's pretty damn well written, but I still don't like the character, and it's mostly because of what he does in the story. Doesn't mean he's not well written. So I don't know why people have always had this idea of, you know, just because if a character is unlikable, it means they're not well written. That's not the case. That's never the case. Those two are not. I mean, granted, someone could not like the character because they're badly written, but that doesn't. I still don't think those two are technically the same. You know what I mean?
level of artistry. In an arc where human nature is put under intense scrutiny, he's an extreme representation of what humans will do for love and existence. If he wasn't hateable, then he wouldn't be written correctly. Functionally, he is one of the most important characters when it came to shifting the tone in the arc, with his dark, otherworldly mystique and nobility adding an air of elegance that had been absent in the series up until his introduction. And this increased sophistication was vital for creating the ideal atmosphere to introduce such intricate themes later on. But apart from that, Pouf's biggest strengths are in his characterization. Along with being an encapsulation of human expression, Pouf is a beautifully conceived contradiction, an artful paradox. Like the other royal guards, he has an ironic, tragic flaw rooted in humanity that prevents him from being the perfect guard by the Queen's standards. But the nature of his flaw means that one could argue that it isn't really a flaw at all, and this is part of what makes him a more complex case than the other two. While Pito's human trait was empathy and Yuppie's was honor, Pouf's was something else. We'll dive deeper into these dynamics shortly, but the irony of the situation is that he is serving the king in a near-perfect way. The only problem is that he is serving the king that he has conceived in his mind, not Meruem. It's an error in his programming. And what becomes clear as he delves further and further into exquisite madness is that it is impossible for him to fix this.
Okay, I said before I had something that I wanted to mention, and here it is. Remember the beginning of the castle invasion when Zeno did his dragon dive into the castle and it just started bombarding the palace? I said castle before, it's a palace. And you saw a moment where Pito and Pouf both rushed the castle, I said castle again, palace, in order to, help the king because they believed he was in danger. Even though we all know, considering his power, he was in no danger, let's face it. But think about where each of them went. Pito used, I think if I remember correctly, she used N in order to find the location of the king. And once Pito figured out where he was, immediately rushed to that location. But Pouf didn't do that. Pouf immediately went to the throne room. And it again, dude, this if Togashi did this on purpose, it just goes to show you again how much of a brilliant writer he is, because he didn't point any attention to this. He did it subtly. It's something that you have to pick. It's something that you normally would pick up on your own. But consider again the locations where Poof and Pito went to. Pito specifically looked for the king himself because she thinks about the king himself. Poof went to the throne room because Poof only thinks of the king as what he thinks the king should be. You know, like just like what was stated here. He doesn't believe in Meruem, the person. He believes in the king. And when you think about a king, that concept, you would think a king would be in. You would think of you would think of a throne. And it again, each location where Pito and Poof went to just goes to show you something about their character, because Pito still sees the king as king. He doesn't see the king as Meruem, and I see this and I absolutely love it. This is just, again, if Togashi did this on purpose, I don't know if he did it by accident or on purpose. I'm more inclined to believe this was on purpose, but it just goes to show you how much of a brilliant writer he is, because he shows you who these characters are through their actions, not by telling you who these characters are. I know a lot of people will point out, well, what about the constant narration? I understand that criticism, but personally for me, it never bothered me, and that's just small. It's not an overarching problem within the Hunter x Hunter manga. It's mostly just in the Chimera Ant arc. Just to clear that up.
Impossible for him to fix this. To abandon this flawed fixation would be to abandon his nature entirely, and that is not possible. But it must be stressed that he's a man of duality. Because of his nature, every act of selfishness had an element of selflessness behind it. Every time he acted out of his own interest, he simultaneously acted out of loyalty to Meruem. Poof's yearning for purpose and his altruistic love are intertwined, completely dependent on one another, and this is very important. Many tend to view Poof's human flaw as an exaggerated, pathological loyalty, and while it is true that his error manifests in this way, the root cause is idealization. Poof's obsessive devotion stems from his inability to see worth in anything other than his idea of Meruem's success. This was his only desire, the only thing that he significantly valued, and this is key. It is established very early on that the royal guards have the duty of serving Meruem ingrained in their minds, and their perceived self-worth begins and ends with his protection and success. This is what defines them, the literal only thing that they strive for in life. It's a concept that we can relate to, yet not fully understand, because in the royal guards it is one-dimensional and accentuated to the fullest. Essentially, they believe that they have no worth other than their duty. But there is a silver lining in Pito and Yuppie's programming flaws. Pito grew to care for Meruem's feelings, so she could take solace in the fact that while he may not be following his destined path, he had found something that he cared for, something that made him happy. In turn, this made her happy, so him not becoming the optimal king did not bother her. Also, she had begun to form a genuine capacity for empathy, feeling truly sorry for Gon due to Kite's death. Her fear of losing Meruem made her conceptualize and understand how others care for their loved ones, which just slightly hints at the idea that she had a potential for making connections and developing other relationships aside from Meruem. On the other hand, Yuppie's lack of individualism made him a man of pure duty. However, upon his final battle, like so many of the other characters in the arc, Yuppie developed. Through his bouts with Shoot, Knuckle, Killua, Melioron, and Morel, his sense of honor sprouted. He learned to value the conviction of others and respect pure commitment, even if it came from an opposing side. He grew so much that he let sworn enemies of his king live out of respect, when it would have taken him just a few seconds to end it. Ironically, for a character who was duty personified, Yuppie finds himself to be the guard with a value most detached from his original role. And in examining this, it becomes crystal clear as to why these two didn't oppose Komugi to the extreme that Poof did. They still sought purpose, but due to Pito and Yuppie's human characteristics, they did not stake as much value on Meruem's objective success as Poof did, because deep within them, they had different values, other methods of fulfillment, alternate ways of interacting with the world.
Yuppie は自身を重ね、ピトーの機微が理解できた。プフがピトーだけでなく、ユピーにも訪れているであろうわずかな変化に恐れを抱いていること。
Some would argue that due to this, they may have even had the remote potential to build a life without Meruem in it. It's certainly an unlikely possibility.
No,
But
I don't think so.
unfortunately for Pouf, while empathy and honor provide alternate ways of finding value in life other than through Meruem's success, his very specific idealization gave him no alternative values. He was all in for what he perceived the king to be and what he was supposed to become, and this was truly his only purpose in life. And when people are faced with losing their purpose, they can do unspeakable things. Multiply this tenfold due to Pouf's unique characterization and situation, and we get his madness, this downward spiral.
Okay, so I just want to talk about that for a second. And you know, what he said is absolutely correct. I mean, sometimes when people are faced in those situations, they end up doing things that you normally wouldn't think that character would do. And that's actually kind of normal. You know, someone, you probably have someone in your life who, you know, you've known for years and you would think, no, this person would never do this, whatever it is you're thinking of. But the thing is, this is something that people tend to forget, is sometimes you never know what you're going to do in certain situations. You know, sometimes you would think that this person, they're so vehemently against committing this certain action, but when faced in certain situations and left with very little choices, again, people can do things that will surprise you. And I usually, when you see this in stories, one thing that does kind of bother me is that whenever this happens in stories, some people will go out there and say this is completely out of character and that they would never do this based on what you've established. But again, they don't think about the situation that the character was put in. Normally, yes, if they were given the option of not doing it, they wouldn't. But again, when you consider the situation they were in, you would realize that sometimes they're left with no choice. You know, again, it's not something they want to do, and I feel like that's emphasized based on how the character reacts to doing, you know, said action that you know they would normally not do. Like, let's say, for example, you establish a character who's vehemently against killing, like, let's say, Batman, for example, and he's put in a situation where he realizes that, okay, the only way I'm going to get out of this is to kill someone. And even though you know Batman is vehemently against doing that, and normally you would think Batman, being the genius that he is, would think of a way against it, but realizes, no, every single time I try to think of a way out of this, it only leads to me taking the life of this person. And if you have Batman doing it, now granted, some people could blame the writer for putting Batman in that situation, and normally I wouldn't be against it, because I do think that is an interesting thing to sort of view, because, you know, I guess some people would like to know, would like an answer to the question, like, what would happen if Batman, let's say, was put in a situation where he would have to kill in order to, you know, because that's the only solution. Would he do it, or would he still stick to his principles and not break his one rule? So if he does, I think most people would be curious to see the reaction to it, because let's say, for example, if Batman were to have no reaction to it whatsoever, he were to just go on as normal, as if nothing ever happened, then yes, people would call that out as being a case of bad writing, because you've established that Batman is a character who's vehemently against killing, and you just had him take someone else's life, and yet you don't have him reacting in the way that he would based on how you've written him. But if he does react in the way that you would expect, then that would actually be a case of good writing, because it would be you making the character stick to what you've written him as. Sorry, that went into a bit of a long tangent, but I just wanted to sort of talk about that for a second.
ユピーとの経緯からプフとも同様に理解し合えるかもしれない。そんなナックルの淡い期待は粉々に打ち砕かれた。
When Pito tries to save Komugi's life, Poof is naturally unable to come to grips with it because he doesn't understand what the king values. Or rather, he cannot approve of what the king values, only what he values in the king. Komugi detracts from that, and in doing so, her existence denies Poof's reason for living.
私には確証がありません。ピトーの変化が果たして本当に王のためになるのか。
When this focal point threatened to be taken away, Poof found himself at serious risk of being cut off from anything in life worth living for due to the one-dimensionality of his endeavors. His devotion is a double-edged sword because his duty is everything to him. It is the reason for his supreme strength, but as a result, it is also the reason that his purpose is so breakable. Without extra dimensions to one's life, one's perception of their existence becomes unbending. As such, for Shaipouf, when coming to terms with failure to protect the king, or more importantly, the king straying from his path, he is faced with the possibility of nothingness. And as an individual so full of passion and life, Poof found this concept reprehensible. The circumstances were forcing a person characterized by art and laughter and tears in extremes to suddenly lose all of his ties to what makes existence worthwhile. From total life to an existential death. From everything to zero. It's forcing a man of pure idealism to submit to nihilism, and it understandably leads to an extreme dissonance within him. Poof would not stand for this. Instead, he rejects it and does whatever he can to maintain life's value. This puts his drastic mood swings into perspective. He's beautiful and full of love when he has his purpose, and violent, conniving, and ugly when things threaten to be taken away. His artful characterization and Togashi stylization dress him up, but in essence, this is true self-defense and really quite primitive when it comes right down to it, and he was like this from the very beginning. In contrast to the insanity that occurs later on, Poof is introduced to the story in an understated and subtle way. Eccentric and artistic as he is, in the early parts of his life, he acts relatively normal, with very little to hint at the inner turmoil that would soon bubble over. But this makes complete sense. His king had been born and was acting as a king should, so Poof's purpose was being fulfilled. Everything was going according to plan, so he was content. But this elegant, soft-spoken demeanor slowly begins to crack, giving off an impression of a false, deteriorating persona when his back is against the wall.
でも、はあ、答えの出ない問いに溺れて悩む自分に酔っていた。それが思考の
Shaipouf is a self-proclaimed thinker. He ponders, he debates, he philosophizes, he indulges in the inner workings of his own mind, and he finds it exquisite. But the mind is volatile. While it can be a place of great escape, internal expression, and enlightenment, it can also be a place where someone drowns in their thoughts in an extremely negative way. And due to his cerebral nature, we see both sides of this in Poof, accentuated by the introduction of a certain young woman. This cracking of his psyche begins to take place, insecurity takes root, and little hints of anxiety begin gnawing at him, as he sees Meruem, the supposedly completely ruthless king, start to form a relationship with Komugi.
この女、危険だ。このままだと厄介な存在になる。
But despite Poof beginning to lose his grip
He still
here,
won't do
this
it.
stretch of his arc is characterized by his restraint. His sense of duty overpowers any underlying thoughts and prevents him from giving into his impulses, because things are not yet serious or severe enough to force him into any sort of action. After Meruem rips off his arm as a show of resolve, Poof offers to die if his king does not consider his compromise of Pito healing his arm while he plays to be desirable. For him, if his king is unsatisfied with his service, he does not deserve to live. However, this eventually changes as his perception of an inconsistency between what the king wants and what is good for him grows in substance, and as a result, his goal threatens to slip from his grasp. Understandably, his characterization begins to shift as this happens. He doesn't kill Komugi when the stakes are lower because the king must become a supreme being, the best at everything. Pouf cannot leave him a loser at Gungi, so until Meruem wins a match, Komugi must stay alive. However, due to Pouf's earlier fears, that thinking becomes dismissed and priorities begin to change as the king continues to humanize. And this is when Pouf begins to lose himself in his own mind, his intense love for the king dovetailing with his self-criticism, his over-reliance, his idealization, and his off-the-wall personality. While Pouf is the one who witnessed most of Meruem's interactions with Komugi and would thus be the one to see things the clearest, he is simultaneously someone who cannot see things clearly because of how personal a concept the king's success is to him.
正直に言おう。私は恐れているのだ。
Okay, I just want to pause here for a second and talk about what he said right here about how Pouf has this sort of idealized version of who the king is, and I feel like, again, when you look at the characters of Hunter x Hunter, and I feel like one thing that does sort of make a really, not only a great story, but it just speaks to the talent of the writer, the author, is if you look at each character sort of tells their own story, and each character sort of, like, sometimes great writers will use their characters just to tell the audience, whether you're watching the movie or show, or if you're reading a comic or a book, each character, sometimes the author will use it, like I said, to tell a sort of mini story and to relay a message to their reader. And I feel like in the case of Pouf, I feel like it's probably Togashi trying to tell the audience. Now, again, this is just what I got from it. Maybe he didn't have this planned at all. I don't know. I'll have to ask the guy himself. But what I sort of got from Pouf as a character is that, you know, sometimes it's not a good idea to have this idealized version of someone in your head. Like, I feel like some people take, let's say, for example, celebrities, and they just completely idealize them in their head, and then when something comes out about that celebrity that sort of just threatens to, I guess, shatter that worldview, the way they react is just goes to show you how dangerous it is to idealize anyone. Because some people, like, when they hear something, like, let's say they find out a celebrity did this or this or that, the way they react shows you just how much they've idealized that person in their head, because sometimes they'll either be completely depressed or they'll just completely deny it. And it's because they absolutely refuse to believe that this person that they've built up in their head as being one thing could do something that just completely threatens that in any way, shape, or form. I mean, how many, for example, in the recent age of, you know, social media, now that it's become more prevalent, how much more information are we starting to get about, you know, celebrities that we didn't know before? And that's because, you know, they have social media accounts and it allows them to sort of speak their minds. And now you kind of wish that they would, you know, not do that, because, you know, the things that they say sort of makes you realize that who this person is. And while most people don't have a problem with that, you know, most people don't build up these people in their heads to be anything other than just regular people who are fallible just like all of us. Some people don't do that. They have it in their heads that they're these perfect human beings because they sort of marry what they see on screen to the actual person. And it actually is kind of sad if you think about it, because, again, I don't know if Togashi did this on purpose. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but I feel like that's probably kind of what he was trying to say with Pouf, as, you know, you should never have just this idealized version of a person, because not only are you building something completely unrealistic in your head, but you're also showing that you may be don't really care about the person as a person. You just care about them because of what you want them to be. All right, I'm just gonna continue with the video. I know that kind of went on for a bit. Sorry about that.
To him.
正直に言おう。私は恐れているのだ。
There you go.
今王に芽生えているものはこの上なく不安で恐ろしくてたまらないのだ。
No wonder he's afraid. Not only does he believe that a loved one is making a fatal error, but his life purpose is slipping away. And as someone with programmed humanity within him, he is beginning to act in self-defense to preserve this, because humans need it. When Pouf comes to this realization, it causes immense internal agony that I don't think can be overstated. Think of your ultimate goal in life, the one thing that you want to achieve more than anything else. Now, take away any other fallback plan and secondary goal you have. Eliminate everything in your life that doesn't pertain to this one thing. Next, try to imagine your desire for this success amplified many times over. And lastly, imagine that due to forces beyond your control and understanding, that goal is slowly slipping from your grasp, and you are unable to do anything to prevent what you perceive as failure when it comes to your only reason for existence. Even though he is literally helpless in this situation, he chastises himself so harshly, consciously for failing Meruem, and subconsciously for failing himself.
Okay, this is interesting. I'm sorry, I know I keep pausing, but I don't want to talk over the video. But based on what he just said, let's just go back and listen to what he said again.
He is literally helpless in this situation. He chastises himself so harshly, consciously for failing Meruem, and subconsciously for failing himself.
Okay, that part in particular, I feel like that might speak to sort of Togashi himself, because in case you don't know, or you don't know the story, Yoshihiro Togashi didn't just write Hunter x Hunter, he also wrote another story called Yu Yu Hakusho. And if you know the story of, especially the I guess you could say the behind the scenes of it, but Togashi put out a message talking about how it was basically an apology to the fans of ending it the way he did, because he was feeling just, again, it's been a while since I read the message, so maybe I'm misremembering it, but he basically talks about how he couldn't get into it anymore. There were times where he would sit at his desk and just try to draw, try to write, and he wouldn't feel it, and it would just make him miserable. And so he basically ended it because he felt like it was probably the best thing for him, and he felt like he was being a little bit selfish because he felt like he was letting down his fans. And I can't help but feel like maybe when he wrote this, he was sort of thinking about what happened to him in the past, about how Pouf consciously failed Meruem and then subconsciously failing himself. I can't help but feel like that was probably Togashi maybe mentioning something about how he probably feels like he let down the fans by ending Yu Yu Hakusho so early, and maybe feeling like he failed himself because he couldn't continue with it. Like eventually his mental state got to him. I don't know, again, maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but we'll see.
This is something that causes Pouf to be exceptionally hard on himself. Failure in any form is something that he absolutely punishes himself for internally, because this is his nature. And when you take this and everything about the character into consideration, his behaviors make a great deal of sense. No wonder he moans in pleasure when he ends up being the reason that the king is resurrected. He could not have asked for a better, more fulfilling task. It is beyond orgasmic, beyond ecstasy. It is the greatest thing that Pouf could have asked for and felt in that very moment.
Okay. Yeah, there's no chance that this video is getting monetized.
Here he is fulfilling his ultimate purpose, and the impact is accentuated because it initially seemed as though Meruem had forgotten about Komugi, and subsequently, Pouf decides to dispose of her before his king has a chance to find that irreplaceable answer that he could not seem to put his finger on. He is not oblivious to the king's intentions and needs here, and he is burdened by the knowledge that he is trying to eliminate something very important to Meruem. And this guilt eats away at him. But in Pouf's eyes, Meruem not remembering the thing that was holding him back is too good of an offer to pass up. Pouf's strict loyalty and purpose overpower his sentiment, as the king remains in the dark. But of course, this wasn't to last. Meruem's love and humanity would not allow itself to be stifled, and it blossomed in him again and again. Tonally, the final acts of the Chimera Antarch are a palpable wind-down. Gon has self-destructed, Morel, Shoot, and Nav have retreated, Pito dies and Yuppie soon after, Netero is gone, and the king is poisoned. The fighting is done. There is a steady decline in action, as if most of the characters involved had realized that this fight was over, except Meruem, who races against time, determined to find that one thing that he couldn't remember, and Pouf, who tries to prevent this. It's saddening for Pouf in concept, due to the air of inevitability that seems to surround Meruem's motivations to find Komugi. And as the story seems to project, Meruem does find the answer he's looking for in Welfin. This is when we see the profound love and desperation that characterizes every fiber of Pouf's being. It's an extremely pitiable state that Pouf finds himself in. Bloody, weak, kneeling in the dirt, being overtaken by poison. And yet, he still remains firm in his resolve, trying his absolute utmost to hide Komugi from Meruem. It's clearer than ever here that he would do, and indeed did, everything and anything for his king. Willing to die, willing to lie, willing to disobey his programming because of his programming. Because he truly loved Meruem enough to fruitlessly attempt to defy what seemed to be destiny despite everything he was suffering through. And for a character that often seems alien, it gets to the heart of a very personal theme, that he is just doing his best to save someone he cares for. This is the perfect demonstration of his devotion, struggling desperately for a sliver of hope, for the smallest chance that Welfin might not say the word that would make Pouf's nightmares a reality. And there is that ever-present selfish element as well. Despite knowing that he was going to die shortly, he wants to make his existence worth something. It's simultaneously a literal fight for his life's meaning and a fight to preserve what he believes is Meruem's purpose. And he does not succeed.
It all becomes clear.
But Pouf comes to a realization. After all of his efforts fail, he finally accepts his fate and bows down to allow humanity to run its course. In the last possible moment, he finally sees what he had been unable to previously. That Meruem would only consider his existence worthwhile if he could be with the person he loved. That his idea of Meruem was not actually Meruem. That he was the only thing standing between his king and fulfillment. Knowing this, Pouf cannot bring himself to give in to his nature. He had been programmed to help Meruem onto a different path, but he also loved him. And now, there is a reversal as sentiment wins over duty. He is finally able to care for Meruem the individual. In his final moments, he transcends his programming and actually makes a breakthrough by accepting Komugi. But inevitably, it was far too late.
It's a shame it happened too late.
恐れた以上に彼女何なりと処罰を
言わずとも伝わっておろう。我らは異体同士、咎などない。
叶うはずなどない
There's nothing he can do but cry in agony. And to rub salt in an already gaping wound, Pouf is present to witness the king's complete embrace of humanity as Meruem spares, validates, and shows appreciation for those he was supposed to rule over and dominate.
人として生きるがよい。
Shortly after, the poison runs its course, and Poof dies an unceremonious death, a juxtaposition to his noble, aristocratic demeanor. Face in the dirt, tears in his eyes, bloodied and broken and alone, his only purpose for living ripped away from him. In actuality, this is the only way this could have ended for him. It is appropriately ironic that a very human fixation ended up being what caused Poof's death. The hopeless contradiction, the poetic madman, the paradox, who was unable to realize that he drove himself mad and became enveloped in sorrow because the king was becoming more and more human, but failed to realize that his own humanity was the cause for that madness. While he did all of these things to sabotage him, and while his devotion did have roots in self-preservation, Poof loved Meruem just as much as the other guards. His backstabbing, his manipulations, his desperation, it was all out of a fierce loyalty, his way of keeping the king from harm. In a way, his hurtful intent is as faithful a display of loyalty as Killua shows to Gon. He just had his own way of showing it.
忠誠と護衛軍の分裂は必ずしも矛盾しないってこと。王が大事にしている人間がいる。だからその人を守ると、だからその人を殺すはどちらも成り立つのよ。
His legacy would seem to be insubstantial except for ultimately being a nuisance to everyone around him for reasons beyond his control. But his short life was far from pointless. It was a mad, flawed, lyrical demonstration of passion, expression, and existence, one that has true roots in simply living and loving. In the end, Meruem acknowledged and very much appreciated his loyalty, and I think that that would have been enough for Poof. He wished for his king's well-being and success above all else, and found his self-worth intertwined with this. He just believed that this well-being and success would come from a life path opposite to what Meruem was on, and he did all he could to correct this. Equal parts selfishness and selflessness, a contradiction characteristic of the man himself. And in this vein, Poof is Hunter x Hunter's most profound display of the duality of the human condition. Humanity is his saving grace and his downfall. Without it, he wouldn't be able to feel as passionately as he does, but he also wouldn't have had to experience such excruciating suffering. Was it really worth it for him in the end? Love, loyalty, mankind's nature, dualism, the ideas that are addressed through Poof's story are synonymous with the themes of the arc itself, and that is part of what makes him so significant. But to talk about such a fascinating character in such a mechanical way seems inappropriate, given the reasons why he truly shines. Poof is an essential character study because he demonstrates the beauty and tragedy of love and purpose, the necessity of flexibility, and how one little inconsistency in one's psyche can lead to unhinged insanity. Dramatic, loud, and over-the-top as he is, his lasting impact ends up being one that is actually quite melancholic and poignant. He was a man who was destined to fail. Humanity always showed itself in these chimera ants, and it was a matter of when, not if, for Meruem too. Because of this, it was inevitable that the king would stray and strongly diverge from his optimal path, and that fact in itself made Poof's downfall a certainty. This doesn't make him any less despicable, and it doesn't make the things he did okay, but it does make him a character of profound substance and emotional resonance. All he wanted for his king was success, and all he wanted for himself was something to live for, and he never really got a chance. For one of Hunter x Hunter's craziest characters, he is as much of a realistic depiction of the extremes, ugliness, and beauty of the human condition as anything else. Many thanks for watching.
Okay. Alright, so that was the video. I wanted to let that last part play out on its own without pausing. So There you go. Okay. You know what? I feel like I've already talked enough about this video, so I'm just gonna end it right here, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully, you'll actually be able to hear the video this time. Remember to leave a like, share the video, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. And I want to give a big thank you to everyone who did subscribe. I am this close to 500 subs. If you want to help me get to that goal, just remember, click the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to let you know whenever I post a new video or whenever I go live. Thank you so much again. I really appreciate your support and look forward to the next reaction, which should be out in about a couple of days from now. Bye for now.